All right, 11 participants in already. What's going on, Vivek? Are you disassembling the meeting room or something?
I'm just making sure all of my notes are in order.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I see there's more and more people on their way in right now. Thank you to our early birds who joined a few minutes early, but we'll give it 1 or 2 more minutes before we get started. All right, well, we're officially a few minutes past the hour. Thomas and Vivek, are you ready to go? Perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss PCI DSS requirements 643 and 1161 and some of these new changes that are affecting SAQ A organizations. We're really excited that you're all joining us here today and hope we can provide something helpful. My name is Lindsay. I've been working in the PCI space here at DataStealth for about 4 years now, and I'll be your host today alongside my colleague and solutions engineer, Vivek, who specializes in data security in quite highly regulated spaces.
Hi, everybody. As Lindsay said, my name is Vivek. I'm the solutions engineer here at DataStealth. Over the past few years, I've been specializing in cybersecurity, more specifically data security and its intersection with highly regulated places that focus on governance and privacy. So in this case, payments.
And we also have Thomas joining us today. Thomas is our Chief Product Officer, who also represents DataStealth with the PCI SSC as our role as a principal participating organization. So Thomas will be joining us today to answer some of your questions about PCI compliance, given his role with the council. But Thomas, why don't I let you say a few words as well?
Thank you, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Looking forward to sharing some great content with you and to what I'm sure is going to be a very active Q&A session at the end. So without further ado, I'll let you go through the content. Thanks, Lindsay.
Perfect. Thank you. So over the last decade, we at DataStealth have been helping large, complex organizations reduce PCI DSS audit scope through our audit scope reduction and tokenization solutions. And to just start with a little side story about our position in this landscape, in around 2019, our partners in New Zealand came to us with somewhat of a unique proposition. So back then, about 6 years ago, the QSAs in New Zealand were witnessing many organizations turn to iframes, redirects, or other methods to outsource their payment flows to reduce PCI audit scope. And what they realized was that this approach was creating an opportunity for e-skimming and Magecart-like attacks. And as a result, these QSAs started asking their merchants to essentially solve for requirements 643 and 1161 before these requirements even existed. So our partners in the area came to us to ask if we would be able to provide integrity checking on content that was being delivered to consumer browsers because they were already familiar with our work of providing tokenization in the line of traffic. So while requirements 643 and 1161 have only been published for a few years now and are only really becoming mandatory at the end of March, we've been solving for these requirements in production for about the last 6 years. And today we want to host this webinar to provide a little bit of insight from our experiences, some clarity on the recent changes for SAQ A organizations, what they mean for your organization, and along with some real life examples of your options for managing PCI DSS 4.0. So to make the best use of our time today, we would really like to start by understanding your main concerns for PCI compliance, or what you're hoping to get out of today, and we can sort of gauge where we need to spend more time as well. So I'm going to open up a poll, and it should pop up on your screens. Feel free to throw something in the chat if that's not the case. But if you can take a moment to think about where you best sit or where you best resonate with one of the answers, that would be great. And while we're giving everyone a chance to go through those, I might as well walk through our agenda for the day as well. So today we're going to be providing a really quick overview of requirements 643 and 1161, just in case anyone needs a quick refresher. We'll discuss SAQ A's removal of requirements 643 and 1161 and some of the security implications that we've been seeing as well. Some solutions for bridging the security gaps. And then we also are sure there's a few organizations who are not SAQ A, but maybe are seeing that they wouldn't need to do 643 and 1161 and are wondering if now is the time to try to attain SAQ A eligibility. So we'll provide some options for figuring out that path as well. And then ending off with a few different options and how to decide on your best path forward. So I'm going to give it 10 more seconds or so while this poll is open, and then I'm happy to share the results. But it looks like we have quite a good mix of what everyone's looking for today. Not surprising. I hope everyone can see the shared results here as well, but not surprising that a lot of individuals are looking for some clarity, and definitely happy to hear that there are many that are looking to learn as well. Vivek, why don't I pass it over to you as we get into the meat of the content?
All right, perfect. Those are some really interesting results from that poll. Thank you for everybody who's participated. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with DataStealth so far, we are a level 1 PCI service provider and a principal participating organization in the PCI Security Standards Council. This is important because it gives us visibility into any DSS changes, which enables us to ensure that any of our customers stay up to date with the best practices and guidance provided by the council, and also helps us provide useful resources like this webinar to the broader PCI community. But DataStealth is a data security platform first and foremost, and is most focused on finding and securing sensitive data in our customers' environments. And we hope that today you see the security first mindset evident across our platform and throughout our PCI solutions. We're looking forward to sharing more about this today as we discuss the changes being made to SAQ A applicability and how we can continue to center security within compliance. But before I get to discussing the changes to the new requirement applicability and what it means to be a SAQ A organization, first, a quick recap of the requirements themselves. First, Requirement 643 calls for merchants and service providers to put in place methods for their payment pages to firstly prepare an inventory of all the scripts that run on the payment page. Next, they call for merchants and service providers to have explicit written authorization for each of these scripts, and this authorization could either be business or technical in nature. And lastly, they call for a method to be in place to integrity check each of these scripts as they are delivered to a customer's browser. The key takeaway with requirement 643 is that no unauthorized code is loaded or executed on a customer's browser. Requirement 1161 calls for merchants and service providers to have an ongoing monitoring mechanism in place that evaluates HTTP security impacting headers and scripts on the payment page as delivered to the customer's browser. This monitoring mechanism should not just be able to detect any unauthorized changes, but more importantly and crucially, generate an alert or notification for involved personnel on the merchant side whenever this unauthorized change is detected. The key takeaway here is that unauthorized changes are detected and by implication either authorized, rolled back, or managed otherwise. Put together, the goal of these requirements is to secure merchants, service providers, and their end customers from client-side vulnerabilities, as these vulnerabilities we've seen recently have been exploited by malicious actors that result ultimately in the theft of cardholder data and other sensitive data during e-commerce transactions. Some of you might be wondering why. Why are these new requirements even a thing? Well, the main reason is that these scripts that we're looking to protect have often been used as an attack surface area by malicious actors. This is because scripts that run on the payment website can interact with sensitive elements on the website and pages delivered, thus providing an opening for malicious actors to exploit, as observed in the following breaches. With LCBO, as recently as 2023, we've seen that a malicious inline script was injected onto their payment page, disguised with Google Analytics tags to essentially exfiltrate payment forms and payment card data. With Ticketmaster, we've seen that a third-party chatbot was compromised to inject skimming code onto their payment page, one of the most famous forms of a supply chain attack. And I'm sure all of you have heard about the breach with British Airways in 2018. This was because some of their admin account credentials were compromised ultimately to inject skimming code into their baggage claim system. These attacks are possible because client-side code is inherently vulnerable to certain attack methods like cross-site scripting or other code injection attacks, and supply chain attacks that exploit third, fourth, and nth-party dependencies to smuggle in malicious code during runtime. These forms of attacks are commonly called e-skimming, form jacking, or mage cart attacks. So if you've heard any of these terms before, now you know what they actually mean. These attacks are insidious, persistent, and extremely taxing to recover from because by their very nature, they're very, very hard to detect. That is because malicious code can be selectively rendered inactive by actors based on certain conditions, such as if they detect a security standpoint or a security sensor on the payment page. This is coupled with attackers leaving backdoors, as was recently seen here in this case where Google Tag Manager was used as an attack vector and malicious attackers left behind PHP backdoors for potential reinfection in the future. And what this means for merchants who've suffered a breach the first time is that forensic investigation and remediation is that much more time-consuming and costly because of this very possible chance of reinfection. On January 30, 2025, that is not even a month ago, the Council, however, removed requirements 643 and 1161 from SAQ A applicability, which is to say that for any merchant who is audited as a SAQ A merchant, these requirements are no longer applicable. This change was paired with new eligibility criteria for SAQ A merchants, which is to say that to become SAQ A, however, merchants now had to demonstrate additional capabilities. Lindsay, can you unpack these changes and describe the security implications to the community at large of these changes?
Sure, absolutely. So as Vivek mentioned, of course, a few weeks ago, the council did decide to remove 643 and 1161 for SAQ A merchants, but they also added some very specific eligibility criteria for SAQ A organizations as well. And this is that merchants need to confirm that their e-commerce systems are not susceptible to attacks originating from scripts that are loaded on the merchant's site. So I'm sure, as you all know, we've definitely experienced it here at DataStealth. Thomas and Vivek could confirm that for you. There's been quite a lot of confusion and noise around different interpretations of these changes, the wording of eligibility criteria, the intentions of the requirements, and so on and so forth. But I would just like to start by taking a step back for a second. Really, no matter how this language is interpreted or clarified, these security risks that 643 and 1161 aim to address, e-skimming and mage card attacks, still exist and are very real threats for organizations that process online transactions. So Vivek just mentioned a few high-profile mage card attacks like British Airways or Ticketmaster. Really, at the end of the day, their SAQ level would have had very little impact on the outcomes of those events, right? You know, choosing to assess as a SAQ A or a SAQ D has no effect on a bad actor's ability to launch an attack, but having the right security measures in place could greatly reduce their chances of success. So if I were a hacker right now and I were a clever hacker, which, you know, I like to think I would be, although I'm not, and I saw a few weeks ago, I'm keeping up with the news. I want to see what's going on with the PCI standards. And on January 30th, I see that SAQ A organizations no longer need to ensure that their consumers are receiving authorized content. The first thing I would be doing is starting to look for organizations who I think that might be SAQ A. And as we know, this is already happening, right? SAQ A's can sometimes be the low-hanging fruit for any hacker looking to launch an attack. There are some very easily identifiable signs of who might be a SAQ A organization. So again, if I was a hacker and I had ill intentions, I would be searching for companies who outsource to an iframe or a third-party service provider. And I would essentially take that bet that for every 10, 15 sites I targeted, at least a few of them would have no idea if I tampered with the contents of their payment pages, and I could start skimming credit card data without them knowing. And really, the research is confirming that this is happening. Just last year, in July of 2024, a study of 2,000 e-commerce forensic investigations showed that in all cases where e-skimming occurred, the merchant site or the merchant's referring page was where that security failure was happening. So of these cases where malicious activity was detected, upwards of 46% of attacks occurred on pages that hosted or redirected to an iframe, and 10% targeted the pay button that redirected to a fully hosted payment page. So for all these reasons, it is our opinion that while SAQ A organizations no longer need to adhere to requirements 643 and 1161, we would still definitely recommend that merchants have some kind of method in place to ensure that consumer browsers are only receiving authorized content or only receiving the content that you want to be giving to them. And from a compliance perspective, just to be clear here, it's clear that security is still remaining top of mind for the council, given this very specific eligibility criteria for SAQ A organizations. So you can also deploy a solution to manage scripts and content to help you continue to meet SAQ A eligibility. And this will help to confirm that your site is not susceptible to attacks from scripts that could affect e-commerce systems as well. So we do have a few different options for SAQ A organizations that are concerned about the security risk or that want to be able to continue to maintain their SAQ A status. And our first option is quite simple. It's really just to stay the course, pretend like 643 and 1161 are still relevant to you. So continue going about finding a method to ensure that all scripts and content delivered to your consumers' browsers are authorized and maintain integrity. We want to make sure that your consumers are only receiving content that you want to give them, of course. Now, our second option is more focused towards organizations who are using an iframe or a third-party service provider. But this would be to secure that iframe through a tamper-proofed payment form injection, which I will get into a little bit more as well. So we'll start off with option one, staying the course. And just to be clear, this is a great option for anyone else who is not SAQ A but wants to or needs to meet 643 and 1161. Now, there are a number of tools on the market that can help you achieve this, many of which, of course, are advertised as being solutions for requirements 643 and 1161. And these can also help you keep your consumers safe during online transactions. Now, to help our SAQ A customers eliminate the security gap, we've just been deploying our tamper detection and protection solution to ensure that all scripts and content that are delivered to consumer browsers are authorized and maintain integrity. So without going into too much detail here, this is really done by scanning all scripts and content that the merchant has on their payment page, and we create an inventory of all that approved content. Now, since DataStealth operates in the line of traffic, as you can see on my little diagram to the right over here, we're going to ensure that anything being delivered to the browser matches the inventory of authorized content that we created. Now, if it does, we allow it to go through. If it doesn't, we have a few methods for blocking either specific scripts or the entire page, depending on a number of different things. So how critical the script is to the transaction, a number of other merchant needs as well. There are a bunch of different ways that we can consider options here. So if you are already SAQ A and you don't want to make significant changes to your payment environment, finding a minimally invasive solution like tamper detection and protection is a really good option to continue business as usual, but continue to protect your customers during online transactions as well. So this might be a good option for you if you don't want to make major adjustments to your payment environment, but are still concerned about these e-skimming attacks or the other security risks that can come with not adhering to 643 and 1161. The other great option for that one is that it can also help you confirm that your site is not susceptible to those attacks as well, which can help you maintain eligibility for SAQ A. Okay, let's talk about iframes. Now, many organizations use an iframe to remove credit card information from their environment and also to reduce PCI audit scope. And of course, all of this is done for very good reason. Totally understand why people would want to do that. Now, I wanted to start off by saying iframe vendors are selling a secure product, but this security is only guaranteed by the provider when the customer reaches the iframe. So the way I've kind of been trying to explain this, or the analogy I've been using, is you can think of an iframe provider as a school bus. So a school bus is providing a service to ensure that kids get to school safely. They are responsible for your kids from the moment they step onto the bus until they arrive at school. But they will take no responsibility or liability for anything that happens until your kids step onto the bus. If your kid walks to school and rolls an ankle, that's not their fault. They weren't on the bus. And it's really the parents' responsibility to make sure that they get to that bus safely. This is sort of the same degree of responsibility or liability that iframe vendors will generally provide. They will say, we will take care of your customers, but it's not our fault if something happens to them before you get them to us. So very similarly, if you're a merchant that uses an iframe or a third-party service provider, and you want to provide a safe user experience, you want to avoid brand reputational damage of a breach, you need to make sure that customers can securely navigate through your site to a safe arrival at that iframe or a third-party service provider. So back into more realistic terms for what we're talking about. An example is if I hosted my payment page and I used an external iframe, let's call it super secure iframe, what would be to stop someone from injecting their own malicious iframe before my intended super secure iframe is executed on the page? And this exact security concern is one of the initial reasons that requirements 643 and 1161 were introduced. It is also why some in the industry have found it a little counterintuitive to remove the applicability of these requirements for SAQ A, especially when considering a lot of organizations attain SAQ A eligibility through an iframe, but that's neither here nor there. So another reason why we would encourage SAQ A organizations to implement a method to secure pages that host a payment iframe, regardless of whether or not they are compliance requirements, this is one way that we can consider that security gap. Now, as you might recall us mentioning at the beginning, DataStealth is a level 1 PCI service provider. And this is because we provide our customers with an e-commerce payment solution where we provide a payment form injection or an iframe into our customers' websites. And we also tokenize the payment card data as it passes through their customers' environments. Now, this tokenization process is done outside of the merchant's environment and in the exact location of our tamper detection and protection solution. And the reason that this is important and why I bring it up is because by sitting in that line of traffic, we're also able to integrity check all scripts and content delivered to user browsers, which includes that payment form we're providing as well. All this to say, I can completely understand that replacing an iframe can sometimes be quite resource intensive. It might not always be feasible. However, if any of you are considering either adopting or reevaluating your current setup, this could be a great opportunity to also reduce the number of tools needed for your payment service providers, compliance and security needs as well. Some other reasons we've seen for switching up your payment service providers might include vendor lock-in. Maybe your iframe provider is also your acquirer. Unfortunately, we've seen in the past some acquirers using this dependency to justify some significant price increases. Maybe your vendor is unable to provide an AOC or a RACI. There's pricing concerns, or maybe you're just coming up on the end of your contracts and you're looking to see if there would be something that would be more beneficial. It might be worth looking into a payment service provider that includes monitoring and integrity protection, or at least one that can easily integrate with a solution that can. So if this resonates with you, I know I'm speaking very high level about our process for achieving all this. Not to worry, Vivek is going to be speaking more on our approach on this shortly, but this option could be great for organizations who want to prioritize simplicity. You want to reduce the number of tools needed. You want to minimize compliance costs and maintain a consistent brand experience. Many iframe providers, ourselves included, will provide an iframe that's stylized to match your site, and also to eliminate vendor lock-in and keep some bargaining power in your pocket as well. So I'm sure there are a few of you here today that are not SAQ A. Maybe you're wishing you were, given the removal of some of these requirements, or maybe you're even seeing ahead of how this method could benefit you as well, or help you attain or come closer to SAQ A eligibility. Vivek, can you share a little bit more about this approach for those organizations as well?
Sure, Lindsay. At DataStealth, we help organizations reduce their audit scope and work towards achieving SAQ A eligibility, primarily through a process called payment form injection. Now, I don't think it needs to be said that achieving SAQ A eligibility comes with it a significant cost and time savings during your audits, and associated with the controls and systems that you need for this audit process itself. But back to the payment form injection solution. This is a solution that eliminates the need for merchants to store, process, or transmit cardholder data, enabling them to fully outsource cardholder functions and reduce the scope of their cardholder data environment, or CDE for short. For those of you wondering what exactly is a payment form injection, well, it's a mechanism where the form that accepts the payment card information or the credit card information is actually hosted by a third party, in this case, DataStealth, and not the merchant. And when a buyer reaches the checkout page on the merchant's website, the payment form is injected into this website via JavaScript and ultimately rendered on the browser via an iframe. The seamless integration allows for merchants to capture cardholder data without ever handling the raw cardholder information. And as a result, we can help merchants achieve SAQ A eligibility or get as close to it by tokenizing cardholder data before it even reaches their e-commerce systems. To provide this service, as Lindsay has already pointed out, the key is that we route payment traffic through our platform. This routing traffic through our platform enables us to rewrite web pages as they are rendered on the customer's browser. And more importantly, it allows us to intercept and tokenize cardholder data before it reaches the merchant systems. On the way out of the merchant systems, that is to say, to either maybe a billing service provider or a payment processor, we're able to transform these tokens back into their original credit card value, ensuring that the payment processor receives the real card data. This entire process of intercepting, tokenizing, and then de-tokenizing the data allows for a merchant to store cardholder data externally and drastically reduces the CDE that they have to manage. Logically, taking this to its extreme, which is to say that by fully outsourcing cardholder functions, merchants can reach the card not present or all cardholder functions fully outsourced state. This significantly reduces their audit scope, potentially to SAQ A, allowing merchants to self-attest for their PCI audits and, most importantly, sidestep requirements 643 and 1161, which would no longer be part of their audit scope once they achieve SAQ A status. Now, you might be wondering, hey, Vivek, Lindsay just spent all of this time telling us that even using an iframe does not guarantee secure collection and transmission of cardholder data, which is to say that the kid might be boarding a bus, but how do you know that they boarded the right school bus? Well, you're absolutely right, which is why, in our opinion, a monitoring and integrity checking mechanism is crucial to be combined with the payment form injection. This combination allows for injected payment forms to be secured from e-commerce e-skimming and mage card attacks, the types of attacks and client-side attacks that we spoke about earlier. At DataStealth, because we're already in line of traffic, which is to say that the payment traffic flows through our platform, we provide our tamper detection and protection capabilities to ensure that the integrity of the injected contents being delivered to customers' pages. Further, any merchants who are benefiting from this solution are also benefiting from our attestation of compliance, since the solution is a managed service. So we give them our attestation of compliance and RACI matrix, which they can then use during their audit to give to their auditors. Now, in closing, what I'd like to say here is that the payment form injection solution allows for merchants to provide a secure, PCI compliant user experience, helping them reduce their PCI audit burden and mitigate risk overall. For those of you who are perhaps not even contemplating the journey to become SAQ A, or this is not in your near time horizon and are currently doing your audits as SAQ AEP or SAQ D, the changes to the new requirements do not really affect you, which is to say that you should either already have in place or are actively working to put in place systems and controls to satisfy the new requirements, requirement 643 and 1161. To that very end, the PCI Council has proposed a variety of approaches and provided some guidance in methods and mechanisms that can be used by merchants to meet these requirements. As Lindsay has already said, and I'm sure you're well aware by now, DataStealth has experience with these requirements and client-side security for over 5 years. And during this time, we've worked with a plethora of merchants and service providers who've tried building solutions in-house or have tried using a variety of commonly available third-party technologies. Based on these experiences, and before you make your own decision as to how you're going to go about either meeting these requirements or putting in place security mechanisms in your e-commerce workflow, there are some limitations and considerations that we wanted you to be well aware of. Firstly, let's discuss Content Security Policy, or CSP for short. In our opinion, CSP should be an integral part of every merchant's security framework. It is an extremely powerful tool set, but ultimately it is a very, very restrictive tool set. It can be used to ensure that page contents that are served are from authorized sources only. But what we've seen is that maintaining CSPs for dynamic environments is definitely a non-trivial task, which is to say that misconfigurations are extremely common, and there are often trade-offs made between security and functionality, where merchants start using workarounds and entire domains start getting whitelisted, defeating the purpose of using the CSP in the first place. CSP also has some other drawbacks in it, which is to say that inherently it wasn't designed to detect script changes or script behavior changes, as long as none of the CSP policies are violated. So if no disallowed domains are being contacted post-change, the CSP cannot detect unauthorized changes. What about using SRI tags or sub-resource integrity? This too is a great resource and should also be a part of your security framework. The drawback with SRI, however, is that in our opinion, it is highly impractical for dynamic environments because it requires dynamic generation of these checksums or hashes for the scripts to be evaluated against. This also proves to be challenging when implementing SRIs on third-party resources or third-party scripts, because as the name says it, these scripts are third-party and not within the merchant's direct control. So you're not necessarily going to be in a position to calculate new checksums or embed them into the script whenever these changes are occurring on the scripts themselves. We've also seen some merchants evaluating third-party solutions, such as using sensors to plug the gaps in their existing security framework. While using these solutions is valuable and has definitely helped a lot of organizations attain compliance, from a security standpoint, we still feel that there are some drawbacks and considerations that merchants need to be well aware of. Firstly, we've seen that malicious actors can detect sensor activity, and when they detect sensor activity, they do have the ability to respond with clean code, which is to say that they make it extremely difficult to detect malicious activity on a payment page. In my opinion, the most important consideration when evaluating a sensor, however, is the browser dependency or client-side dependency that these solutions have. We've heard some stories where browser plugins, like for example, YouTube ad block, can disable these sensors from loading on pages. And when you think about it, you're essentially relying on a browser that you don't manage, running on a device that you don't control, operated by a user you don't know to be compliant. We've also seen that between tool A and tool B, there could be extremely high variance, both in detection and handling capabilities. Therefore, evaluating these tools is not an apples to apples challenge. Now, consolidating all of these observations, we've built our tamper detection and protection solution to minimize all of these limitations. And here are some of the core values that our solution brings to the table. Firstly, and most importantly, our approach involves layering these defenses one on top of the other. If you're a merchant and you have no CSP, you have no SRI, well, that is absolutely no problem because DataStealth can inject security headers or enforce SRI tags in real time. These are then layered on top of these are layered real-time tamper detection, script handling, and management capabilities, which is to say that every time a payment page is delivered to a customer's browser or a consumer's browser, our tamper detection and protection mechanism does an integrity check and has within it protection policies to handle any unauthorized changes. Our architecture and approach, which involves getting in line of the payment traffic, makes our solution fully platform agnostic, which is to say that we are compatible with all modern clients and browsers and all modern server-side technologies to deliver the solution. If you have a dynamic environment, maybe you have an SPA or multiple SPAs, maybe you're injecting dynamic scripts for functionality like Google Tag Manager. Maybe you've made use of dynamic frameworks like, say, React or Vue to build your web application. You don't have to be worried at all because our solution is fully capable of handling these dynamic environments and changes to them. And last and definitely not least, our solution is a managed service, as I said earlier. But this means that your security and operations team doesn't have to deal with all of the noise generated by a monitoring and alerting solution. We have a qualified DataStealth professional or a team of professionals at your disposal who essentially validate and highlight alerts and only surface the alerts that need the merchant's immediate attention. With all of these differing interpretations and opinions on the changes to requirement 643 and 1161 applicability, we would like to close today by reiterating that no matter what is required to meet compliance, security should always be the top priority when considering your customers and your e-commerce systems. We provided a few different options for you for ensuring security and compliance. Lindsay, how would you recommend attendees today consider their options moving forward?
Sure. Yeah, Vivek, as I'm sure you would agree, as we've been working to provide this content for you, it's been made very clear to us that navigating PCI compliance, especially through all these changes for applicability with SAQ A and a number of other changes that are on the go, it's clear that PCI compliance is not a one-size-fits-all solution. There are many factors that can contribute to one approach being more beneficial to an organization than another. For example, maybe you have a significant number of pages. You might be looking for a solution that is a flat fee versus consumption. If you want a higher level of simplicity or more control, what tools you already have in place and where you can supplement versus where you may need to replace. With all this in mind, there are a lot of different avenues for organizations to take. And because of that, we would love to offer all of our attendees today some kind of free consultation where we can go through your unique environment and your needs and what you're looking for and work to help you figure out what the right path forward is in meeting PCI 4.0 compliance. So if this is something you'd like to take advantage of, feel free to reach out through our website, or I'm also going to pop a link in the chat where you can book a meeting with us moving forward. With all that to say, thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming out to learn with us, and I hope that the content provided was helpful. And at this point, we're also going to be opening up our Q&A forum. So if you just give me one moment to pop this link in the chat. Everyone is more than welcome to use our Q&A function, and I'll be moderating some questions here as well. Okay, so our first question for you, Thomas and Vivek, is implementing sub-resource integrity, or SRI, sufficient to be able to attest to the new eligibility criteria? Or do we need to go a little further and implement some CSP and other checks?
Vivek, do you want to take that one? I think you sort of addressed it a moment ago.
Sure. So our approach is that, or rather our recommendation here is not just using sub-resource integrity and CSP, which is to say that using them is definitely recommended, but in our opinion, due to the drawbacks in SRI, the key drawback being that it does not alert or notify you whenever unauthorized changes are detected, it fails 1161's criteria. CSP is definitely a useful tool. Again, it prevents unauthorized code execution within your runtime environment. But and you could have notifications and alerting enabled through your report-only headers. But CSP also has inherent drawbacks in that once a CSP is configured, the policy set needs to keep track with any changes or any evolution that your e-commerce system undergoes. So any changes within your payment page, any changes within the architecture or flows also need to be reflected within your CSP. And as I said, CSP suffers from some other drawbacks, which is to say that if the changes within your scripts do not violate any of the CSP policies, then those may not necessarily get detected. So the short answer to your question is a combination of SRIs and CSPs can be used to attain SAQ A eligibility. However, the limitations with them make the process not recommended or inadvisable, and our recommendation would be to pair CSP and SRIs with a third-party monitoring and integrity checking mechanism.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vivek. Thomas, I'll let you respond to this next question. What is the council's recommended SAQ for a merchant to complete if the merchant does not want to confirm their eligibility because their e-commerce site is susceptible?
Okay, so great question. I'm going to make an assumption based on the formulation here, which is that the merchant starting point is a SAQ A, right? And so they want to they're not going to be able to confirm that they're not susceptible to attacks. So in that case, the logical step would be to go towards a SAQ AEP. Now the jump is quite significant, where you go from 31 requirements to about 151 requirements. But without that ability to provide these guarantees, considering that confirmation is now an eligibility criteria for SAQ A, SAQ AEP would be the response in my opinion.
Perfect. Okay, moving on to our next question. Does your solution for requirement 643 and 1161 also help SAQ As meet the new eligibility criteria?
So I'll take that one if you want, Vivek, and I'll start answering, and if you want to add, by all means.
Sure.
The short answer to that is yes, absolutely. It does. The solution is designed to address the requirements 643 and 1161. So it's not just for SAQ As, but it's for SAQ APs, for SAQ Bs, for anyone who is who has obligations related to 643 and 1161, or is looking to demonstrate that they have the right measures in place to protect their payment pages from any kind of script attacks. Our solution is suitable across the board.
Fantastic. Okay, next question. If the e-commerce process is fully outsourced to a third-party PCI compliant service provider, do we have to do anything?
All right, so this is fully outsourced. I'm going to assume that, well, there's actually two scenarios. You're going to have the whole experience, like cloud building experience, all the way through payment, which is hosted by a third-party service provider. In that case, the answer would be no, there's nothing really to do, because like none of that experience touches your system. If we move into the second scenario, which is the cart building experience is on your site, then there is some type of a pay now button or go to the pay page, and that is a redirection to a third-party service provider that then takes the consumer by the hand and walk them through the payment process. Strictly speaking, under 643.11.6.1 or under the eligibility criteria of SAQ A, you should not have anything to do there, because the focus of 643 and 1161 is about silent skimming, not double entry skimming. So silent skimming is when some code is able to penetrate the iframe and grab the CVV and grab the PAN from there and send it somewhere else. While a double entry skimming is redirecting the user to a malicious page where the consumer is going to enter the credit card information, submits the transaction, that transaction fails, they're then redirected to the genuine page where they enter their PAN and CVV again. And so it's double entry because even though the page may look the same, you're technically going to two different pages. So in that case, strictly speaking, my understanding is you would not have to do that. However, there is still a security conversation that I believe is very, very important to have, which is if for some reason the button that does the redirection to the third-party service provider where the consumer now enters their PAN and CVV, if that button gets hijacked, then the reputational impact of the breach is going to fall onto the merchant. And so having some security protection here that would prevent users from being redirected to the wrong page, in my opinion, would be a best practice. But this is where I think we're having sort of two degrees of conversation, one that is strictly speaking compliance, while the other one is more, but what about the security of it all?
Just a quick question we have in the Q&A is around recording or PowerPoints. Yes, the recording will be available to attendees after this live webinar as well. Going on to our next question, how would the DataStealth solution help merchants protect their websites, not just the payment page?
Vivek, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. The answer lies in the approach that DataStealth takes towards protecting payments and essentially payment flows. As Lindsay has spoken about, and as I mentioned earlier, our approach involves in us getting in line of the payment traffic. And if we can get in line of the payment traffic, we can essentially get in line of all traffic from that merchant's website, which is to say that from a technology standpoint, a page is just a page. And if we can protect a payment page, we can protect a landing page, and all of it is done essentially through the same approach by getting in line of traffic and defining explicit policies based on how each page is expected to load on a customer's browser and how users are expected to interact with it. So a short answer to your question is that the mechanism that we use to deliver integrity checking and authorization to payment pages can be extended to every single page within a merchant's website, thereby securing and integrity protecting the entire merchant website.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll take one or two more questions. Here's a new one. We use Google Tag Manager and other dynamically loaded scripts. How am I supposed to integrity check them when they are changing all the time?
Yeah, so that's a great and rather common question that we see. So all this dynamic content that gets loaded when the user pushes a button or goes through a menu action or something, these are all scripts that get inventoried by our solution and get verified every single time they are loaded by the consumer's browser. So they can be verified or protected from any kind of tamper even before they reach the consumer browser itself. If those scripts have inside some dynamic content as well, we have the ability to flatten a lot of those scripts so that that dynamic content, such as something that's going to be dependent upon a user ID, for example, if it's post login or things along those lines, can be eliminated. That variability can be eliminated. So we get to the root of what the code in the JavaScript is meant to execute and make sure that this is consistent with the authorized script for which the merchant has provided a business or technical justification.
Fantastic. And we have just a few more. I believe this question is asking for just some confirmation on this statement. So I'll read the statement and then let either of you provide your comments. But the confirmation was that a redirect to payment page for PCI and third-party service provider iframes embedded in the payment page, that the merchant is not responsible for anything in terms of PCI compliant, and the third-party service provider should provide proof that their solution is compliant.
All right, so let me read that again. So redirect to payment page for PCI and third-party service provider iframe. So the question that where we need to be very clear is where the ownership lies of the non-payment page that embeds the iframe that corresponds to the payment page and the SAQ level of the merchant. So if the merchant is not a SAQ A, the merchant is responsible for the parent page, the non-payment page that embeds the iframe. The third-party service provider is responsible for all the scripts that are delivered by the embedded iframe. In the context of a full redirection, where we go back to the cart building experience and the payment that happens on the third-party service provider site, or the cart building experience that happens on the merchant site, and the redirection to the third-party payment service provider for the payment action. In that context, this is double entry skimming, which is not a priority for 643 and 1161. So that would be out of scope for 643 and 1161. I know the question was about getting a confirmation, but there's a few more variables that need to be accounted for in providing that confirmation. So I hope I've provided more clarity, not thrown another layer of confusion on top of the layer of confusion that was there before.
That's very much appreciated. And that's probably a good place to wrap things up as we continue on. Just following on what you said, Thomas, of course, there is a lot of different nuance to all of these situations in how compliance can affect your organization. So if for some of these questions, you would like a little bit more information and you would like to dive into how it affects your organization specifically, definitely feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to walk through what your environment looks like and where we think compliance or security issues may need to be addressed. So like I said, there is that link in the chat if you'd like to book a session with our team. And if any other questions come up or if we, unfortunately, I'm sorry, weren't able to get to your question today, feel free to reach out through our website and we'd be more than happy to help. But with all that to say, thank you so much for joining. Vivek and Thomas, thank you for joining me today as well. And we look forward to chatting more about PCI compliance.